Isaac is neurodivergent. I do not say this to make fun of him or insult him in any way. Isaac has something about him that makes him different. I've never liked referring to anyone as on the spectrum, because if it's a spectrum, we're all on it, and that phrase is therefore not descriptive at all. So I'm thankful that people smarter than I have brought neurodivergence into common vocabulary. Sorry, one thing. Neurodivergence. I just wanted to see what it was. Our sacred text points to some sort of non-specific mental or social condition that makes him different from everyone else. So much so that when studying this section of Torah in Saturday morning Torah studies at past congregations, I've taken to referring to him as having special needs or being autistic, searching for a word or phrase that fits the analysis that something about Isaac makes him unlike any character in Genesis. Isaac is neurodivergent. Today we read the Akedah, the story of the binding of Isaac. It is a terrible story. A story of Abraham being asked by God to take his son up a mountain and sacrifice him. Abraham says yes, goes up to the spot where God shows him with Isaac. Then he binds Isaac, the word that gives the name to this section, since Akedah means binding, and he raises the knife to sacrifice him, only to be stopped by an angel who tells him this was all a test. Abraham did not withhold his son from God, and therefore he will be blessed by becoming as numerous as the stars in the sky and the grains of sand on the beach. The rabbis of the Talmud and the commentators throughout the centuries have struggled with many parts of the text. One of the things that gets their hackles up is the question of how old is Isaac at this point? If he's younger than 13, it makes sense that he might be overpowered by his centenarian father. But the rabbis don't like that math, and they want him to be older, sometimes as old as 37. But if he's older, wouldn't he fight back and not let his elderly father tie him up? Something about it does not fit. So we need to step back to understand more of Isaac's bigger picture. Looking back at Isaac's life, he is never given a voice before or after the Akedah. They speak about him a lot, but Isaac does not speak for himself. When God asks Abraham that he and Sarah will have a son, God tells Abraham he and Sarah will have a son. Abraham wonders how a man of 100 and a woman of 90 could possibly have children together, and he laughs. Sarah has the same reaction later when the angels tell her that she will have a child. They both laugh. Vayitzchak for Abraham and Vatitzchak for Sarah. For their laughter, they're told that they will name their son Isaac, Yitzchak, which shares its root with the laughter they display. Even acknowledging that numbers of years in the Torah are not math, they laugh because they are an elderly couple. They've spent years together, building a life together, building a faith together. They've done far too much for them to be young. Abraham's laughter in Genesis 17 and Sarah's in Genesis 18 are both about how old they are, how silly an idea it is that they could bear children. Isaac's own name means laughter, and it comes from the reaction these two have. So suffice it to say, they are comically old for childbearing. A study was done in Israel in 2006, looking at 132,000 families. It showed that men who conceive in their 30s are 1.6 times as likely to have a child with what the study calls a disability. As as do men under 30. Men in their 40s have a 6-fold increase in risk. Since then, over 5.7 million families have been studied in Denmark, Sweden, California, and elsewhere. Nearly all of this research has shown an increased prevalence of mental disability among the children of older fathers. Clearly, the writers of the Torah were not aware of this study, but perhaps they knew the simple truth that older parents were more likely to produce, in our language, neurodivergent children. The Torah wants us to understand that Isaac is different. We often understand that for their laughter, they beget laughter. But what if the laughter they beget is not a friendly laughter, but one of teasing, making fun, mockery? Once Isaac grows up, he's weaned. It happens in one verse in Torah. In Genesis 21:8, it says, "The boy grew up and was weaned." At the weaning feast, a common custom of the ancient world, Sarah sees Ishmael with Isaac, and Ishmael is mitzachek. The word mitzachek can mean a few different things. It is surely there, at least in part, because mitzachek shares its root with Yitzchak, Isaac's own name. But it could be playing, making sport of, jesting, or toying with. It could be innocent, two brothers playing. Or it could be sinister if Ishmael is picking on Isaac. What further confuses the scene is that we still do not know how old either brother is. We know Ishmael is 13 when he's circumcised, and Isaac is born around a year later, so the boys are probably about 14 years apart in age, but we have no idea how old Isaac was when he was weaned. Evidence suggests that societies at the time stopped nursing their babies between 2 and 5 years of age. So if we assume Isaac was weaned around 3 years old and that Ishmael is around 18, perhaps Ishmael is playing a little rough for Sarah's liking. We've likely seen much older siblings or cousins who play a little rough for the comfort of a new mother. It happens. Or maybe Ishmael mitzachek with Isaac is a kind of teasing we would never tolerate today. Perhaps he's making fun of Isaac's perceived disability. Until very recently, and sometimes still, that was the way neurodivergent people were treated, with teasing and a complete lack of understanding and compassion. It also explains why Sarah was infuriated enough to demand that Ishmael and his mother leave their home. She was defending her son, who might not have been able to defend himself. Now, Abraham might not have shared her sentimentality over Isaac's issues. Today's reading of the Akedah suggests that Isaac may also have needed defending from his father. The Akedah begins with a charge. In a section that starts just before what we read today, God says to Abraham, "Kach na et bincha, et yechidcha, asher ahavta, et Yitzchak." Take your son, your special son, the one you love, Isaac. Abraham has a dialogue with God that, as suggested in a midrash. The midrash is called Bereshit Rabbah. And it takes this phrase that only God says, and it has Abraham interject. God says, "Take your son." Abraham responds, "I have 2 sons. Which one?" "Your special son." Both sons are special. They're unique in their own way. "The one you love." "I love both of my sons." "Isaac." No question when God uses his name. The conversation the Midrash creates suggests that Abraham has love for Ishmael as well as Isaac, which is wonderful. It also might miss something. Perhaps Abraham needs to be convinced that he also loves Isaac. Imagine the conversation without Abraham's midrashic interjections. Internally, Abraham might think that God is finally accepting Ishmael as Abraham's heir, at least until you get to the last word. Take your son, your special son, the one you love, Isaac. Perhaps at that moment, Abraham thinks, Isaac? I love that kid, but he's so different. Men especially can have a hard time accepting a son who is different. So for God to tell him, Abraham, I know you love your son more than just lip service, perhaps more than you realize, and it is time to accept him, can be a powerful moment. Years after the Akedah, several chapters after today's reading, Abraham tells his servant to get a wife for Isaac. He sends him on a journey where he meets Rebekah and invites her to his master Abraham's home. She agrees and goes to meet her husband-to-be, who is sitting alone in a field. What is interesting here is that Isaac needs someone else to get a wife for him. Abraham does not need an intermediary to marry Sarah. Jacob finds Rachel on his own, and although he is tricked into marrying Leah, he agrees to have children with her. Most other biblical characters find their own spouse, for better or for worse. Isaac has an intermediary sent for him. Perhaps this is due to his lack of mental prowess for negotiating a bride price, or perhaps simply just his lack of ability or desire to have a conversation with another person. When Rebekah first sees him and he's sitting alone in the field, the rabbis of the Talmud credit Isaac with davening Ma'ariv, reciting the evening prayers. But this anachronistic commentary ignores the likelihood that this is just where he either preferred or was forced to spend his time. Many people with autism, for example, simply like to be away from other people. They find socializing difficult and do not adhere to social norms. In ancient times, adults with mental challenges were often pushed to the side, told to go away if they could not handle being with others. Whatever challenges Isaac had, being alone in the field makes sense for him as a character. He was likely out there a lot. Looking at Isaac as neurodivergent, we might also understand Abraham's willingness to sacrifice his own son, even when we do not agree with it. He was a man of the ancient world, powerful, wealthy, a leader in his community, successful in every way except one. Then he conceives a son with what at the time would have been perceived as disabilities. Isaac could be a constant source of disappointment for Abraham. Though we no longer share Abraham's feelings of shame over our children who are different, we can acknowledge that shame existed in the ancient world for having a child viewed as less than. A son who, at the time, did nothing but give people something to laugh at. So in the Torah portion we read this morning, when Abraham is told by God, take your son up the mountain, Abraham's speedy acquiescence makes sense, but it doesn't make it right. After the two of them start heading up the mountain, Isaac points out that he sees the wood and the flint, and he asks where the sheep is that they're going to offer. Abraham replies tersely, God will see to the sheep, my son. That's it. That's the only conversation they have. Again, it is typical for a neurodivergent person to point out that something doesn't make sense. The data Isaac is taking in does not match what he's been told. But he waits to talk about it till he's only with his father. So he asks, and he gets a blow-off response of God will see to it. And they walk on. Abraham refers to Isaac as my son at this point. Perhaps the only moment of tenderness between them. So often we look at this pivotal moment in our Torah and we point out the fact that Isaac and Abraham never speak to each other again. What we neglect to mention is that they have never spoken to each other before this part either. Their relationship has always been strained. They have never been close. They go through the motions. Maybe it gets worse after the Akedah, but it is not a complete sea change. Recognizing Isaac as neurodivergent, we may learn how we should behave when we have such people in our lives, our community, our family. Not like Abraham. He was the denying, angry father, disappointed and feeling inadequate about the son he and his beloved Sarah produced. He goes through the motions of circumcising him, finding him a wife, setting him up with property and a good life. Sarah dies shortly after the Akedah and does not even see him married. But even in his early life, she was perhaps overprotective of him. She shuns anyone who would treat him different, kicking Ishmael and his mother out of their home. Really, neither of these are the perfect way of treating someone we perceive as different. The rabbis in Tractate Brachot of the Talmud actually do teach us how to deal with them. They put Isaac in our prayers every day, 3 times a day. They credit him with inventing the evening service because of his practice of sitting alone in the field at the end of the day. They say his name alongside his father Abraham, his son Jacob. We talk about the generations that begin with amazing people, our avot and imahot, our biblical ancestors, and we have never swayed from putting Isaac's name right at the top. They even point out things that could be seen as indicative of his differences and laud them as successes. They are excited that he's the only patriarch to have only one wife. They extol him as the only patriarch to never set foot outside of Canaan. We could easily see these things as being related to his social challenges. Someone without strong social skills would naturally not venture away from familiar surroundings, nor would they seek more companionship when they prefer to be alone. Instead of blaming his condition as the reason he never strives for more, the rabbis compliment him, saying it is his strength of character and grants him the blessing of faithfulness to the land and to Rebekah. I've worked with a few different B'nai Mitzvah with varying challenges over the years. In Miami, one boy held Torah and recited Shema. He is a severely autistic young man, and that was the most that he could do, and it took him years to get that far. And it was a beautiful moment. Another bar mitzvah we worked with was very musical. And even though we heard him chant his Torah portion flawlessly, on the day of his ceremony, he actually made up cantillation on the spot. It was as if he was saying, I don't need you to tell me the notes, I can feel them. When he wasn't singing, it took all of our energy to keep him on the bima, because his tendency was to wander off whenever he fancied. When we work with B'nai Mitzvah today, it's easy to understand that nobody can do exactly the same thing as the last person. Part of instituting what the URJ refers to as B'nai Mitzvah revolution years ago was allowing students who do not thrive in an academic arena to still show us what their strengths are. Not everyone can read Hebrew or even English out loud. Not everyone can deliver a Devar Torah. Yet everyone can be celebrated. Everyone can show us their Jewish passions and accomplishments. Everyone can celebrate their life cycle events in a way that honors their style. This is our responsibility as a community, as a people. When someone is different from us, we do not chastise them, bully them, or tease them for their differences. At the same time, we do not coddle them or keep others away from them because they're different. We learn to work with them. We support them. We learn from them. We take what we might see as a weakness, as less than, and treat it as normal. Or better, we treat it as a blessing. We support and help strengthen the skills and abilities they do have and give them the tools they need to be a success in our community. May we look deep into our ancient texts and learn from the examples of our ancestors. May we continue to reach out to those who are different. May we truly live up to our reputation as a welcoming community by continuing to welcome people of all abilities. May we find the opportunity to let all people know that they are special to us, to our community, and that everyone is worthy of blessing. Ken Yehi Ratzon.